The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about equipment lifespan. I'm not going to go into, the minutia and extreme detail, but I'm going to give you some of what you can expect out of certain equipment on your equipment pad. And the pool lifespan, of course, depends on a lot of factors, and I'll touch on some of those factors as well. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. I think one factor, of course, is how much you pay for the particular equipment based on the category of either is this something that's from a major manufacturer and you're going to be paying a premium, or are you getting something online that's maybe from an unknown company that's at a really good price point. And so this is a factor in anything that you buy. You get what you pay for, and that goes, of course, with equipment. If you're into any kind of other, field photography, or maybe you're into, model airplanes, whatever you're into, you know that the more expensive the item is, the better quality, usually that signifies better quality. A $500 camera is nowhere near as good as a $1,500 camera in most cases. And that goes with pool equipment as well. If you're looking at the big three, Penter, Hayward, and Jandy, and you're buying a variable speed pump from one of these big three providers, chances are that's going to outlast any pump you get on Amazon or from Home Depot. By far, it's going to be a much better quality product. So I wanted to get that out of the way first so that you kind of know where I'm coming from. It's not just, your pool pump should last you 6 or 7 years. There's also factors about what you pay for it is what you're going to get out of it. And I think the more you initially invest in the better equipment, the better off you're going to be. I'll give you filters, for example. Now, I wouldn't recommend you doing this, and I'm just using this as an example. But to me, I think the best cartridge filter out there is the Sta-Rite System 3 filter if you're looking at longevity of the actual filter and parts. Now, the reason why I don't highly recommend this filter is because the cartridges for these filters are really expensive. They're also a little more difficult to clean because they have 8 clamps that go around it, and there's one big and one small cartridge. I wouldn't say small, it's fairly large still, but there are 2 pretty good sized cartridges inside this filter. What I like about them, if a customer does have this installed, I'm not going to have them cut it out, because I do like these filters because they're extremely durable and long lasting. And to me, these are the filters that would probably survive like a nuclear Armageddon. They're just built so well. In fact, I had one where a heater part had dislodged in to the return line and was blocking the return flow. And when this thing would turn on, it would turn on every day for the whole week when I wasn't there. But when I got to the pool, I don't exactly know at what point during the week this actual failed. But when I got there and I turned on the filter, I can actually visually see the tank expanding and then contracting slightly as the back pressure caused, a normal filter would have exploded long ago. And the filter gauge went to like 50. And of course I turned it off, but it was running like that pretty much the whole week and it didn't explode. I think part of that has to do with the 8 clamps that are around there. The other part of it is that it's a really thick plastic that they use for this filter. But I'm just saying this filter is definitely made to last. Now, the cartridges are extremely expensive to replace. Almost the same price sometimes as getting another whole cartridge filter of another brand put in. So I wouldn't recommend this filter just for that reason, but I think they're great and a lot of builders like putting them in. And this is one example of a filter that is on the other end of the spectrum as being really durable and long lasting. So how long are you going to get out of your filter? Well, it just depends on the area you're living in. I mean, the more heat and the more the sun beats down on the filter, the less of a lifespan you're going to get out of that particular filter, whether it be cartridge or RDE. It starts to look really ugly over time. When the sun's beating down on it, the fiberglass will start to kind of come apart. And when you clean it, you're going to get fiberglass shards in your arm. Now, one way to avoid this, of course, you can get saran wrap and wrap the lid of the filter or you can just wear long sleeve shirts is what I do out there. But that doesn't mean that the filter is compromised in any way. It just means that it's getting old. And I always err on the side of replacing the tank before it cracks or there's a problem. So I would say if you have a Pentair filter or Hayward or Janty, you're probably going to get a good 15 years out of the tank. And then I would recommend replacing it because by then you probably already have replaced the clamp at least once or maybe twice, the spring barrel nut at least 2 or 3 times over that 15-year period. So you are replacing some parts of it, but the tank itself has not been replaced, and there's a good chance that it can become compromised at some point and start to crack. I've seen these go a little bit too long. Some people let them go for 17, 18 years, and then they start getting these hairline cracks in them. But they are made really well, and the tank itself will last, I would say, upwards of 12. You could even get 15 years out of it if you really wanted to push it. And I would say, if you change these at 8 or 9 years, it's kind of premature. I wouldn't think that would be necessary unless there was a problem. So you can get at least 12 to 15 years out of a good filter. Tank itself. Now, as far as the elements inside, now if it's a sand filter, you can actually get probably a longer life out of that tank. A lot of these sand filters are made really durable. You just have to change the sand in there, and you may have some broken laterals at some point if it gets to 20 years in age. But as far as cartridges and the grids inside these filters, I would say every 3 years, you want to change the quad type cartridges out, which is the 4 cartridge filter type filters. And if you have a single cartridge filter, I would say every 3 to 6 months you're changing that cartridge filter out because that wears out pretty fast. And as far as DE grids, I would say every 3 or 4 years you're changing all 8 of the DE grids in a DE filter. If a quad DE filter, I would say every 4 or 5 years, you're changing out the quad D cartridges and putting new ones in there. They seem to last a lot longer than the grids, and they seem to hold up a lot better than the cartridges, the standard cartridges. So the quad cartridges, I wouldn't change out every 2 or 3 years. I think you can get 4 or 5 years out of them pretty easily. They're have a material that's pretty durable and long lasting. When the bands start to get kind of weird and all the pleats open up, that's when the quad D cartridges probably need to be changed out at that point. And then of course there are wear parts on the filter, like the backwash valve is a wear part in my opinion, so you're going to have to change those pistons sometimes and the components in the multi-port valve. The filter gauges are also a wear point on the filters. They'll probably break before the filter tank does, so replacing the gauge and the air relief valve is something you're going to have to do. But the tank itself, again, should be a very long-lasting product. Now, when you talk about pumps, I did preface this by price range and brand and model. I would say that a VS pump or variable speed pump is going to give you a longer lifespan, not because you pay more money for it, but because they're made differently. They actually run on DC current, which makes them last a lot longer just by that. And plus, it's kind of like with your car. If you're driving your car 90 miles an hour, 7 days a week, and then you drive another car 35 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour, it's going to last a lot longer. And same with a VS pump. You're not using the full speed all the time, which means that pump, the motor on that pump, should last a very long time. Now, there is a fail point on the VS pumps, and that's the drive on the back. It's kind of like the brain of the system. That's the timer on there, the controller. And when that goes out, I would suggest getting a new pump at that point, because replacing the drive is not something that I would recommend. Yes, you can replace it, but it's pretty expensive. And then you have an old motor on there, and then you have an old pump. And the drive should technically last you 10 to 12 years without having any problems. Typically, the motor on these also lasts a very long time. You're not changing out the motors very often. So the VS pump is a very long-lasting element of your pool equipment, and you're going to get several years out of it without having really any problems if you buy the higher-end versions of these pumps, of course. The lower end would be a problem. And heat is a big factor for pumps in general. If you live in an area where you get 120-degree summers, these pumps are going to wear out a lot sooner than later. It's just the nature of the fact that they get hot, it's hot outside, and it's going to really wear on the wear parts of these pumps in these high extreme temperature regions of the country. If you have a single speed pump, you may have noticed that they don't last very long anymore. I mean, back in the day, we would not have to really replace the pumps that often, or the motors on the back, I should say. because they were very long lasting and very well built. A lot of them were made in Mexico, and they had really good quality control. In fact, when I was talking to the people at the US Seal booth at the pool show a few years ago, they said that the problem is that their seals are lasting longer than the pumps now, or the motors, I should say. And so it's really one of those weird things where before, they're doing better now because you're replacing the motors a lot more often. But in the past, it would be the seal failing before the motor failed. Now it's the motors failing before the seals in the motor fail. And I think that's the common thing. You don't have the same quality of build of the single speed pumps, and you're not going to get a great lifespan out of the motor. Now, the pump and motor are two different components, and I probably should emphasize this. The pump is what we call the wet end. It's the front of it, and the motor's on back. And these are parts that are actually replaceable without replacing both of them in most cases, unless the pump wet end cracked or there's a problem with it. So you would, of course, just change the motor out on back. And the motor lifespans, I would say, are anywhere from 3 to 5 years now, where in the past, back in the 90s, early 2000s, you could probably get 15 years out of these motors, which is kind of unusual as far as quality, but I think everything has gone down in quality across all different fields and sectors, so it's not unusual. So the lifespan of a single speed motor, 3 to 5 years. Lifespan of a single speed pump, I would say about 12 or 14 years. The wet end's going to hold up pretty well, and you won't have to replace that as often as replacing the motor on back of the pump. I'll briefly touch on heaters, and I think heaters are based on the fact of the amount of usage they get, how they're maintained, and where they're installed, and what you're storing around them. If you're storing a lot of chemicals around them, it may not be a good idea to do that, but I really think the heater lifespan is really based on usage. Unlike the other components, the heater is only wearing out when it's actually being used. In most cases, sometimes you have corrosive water going in there. That's not a good thing. If the pH gets too low in the pool and the heater parts start to rust and get corroded, a bad thing. Also, a saltwater pool will sometimes cause some parts like the thermal regulator to wear out sooner than later. So of course, all the sodium or salt in the water is not good for the heater components. So besides that, I think the usage determines the age of the heater. I had a customer that heated their pool every day, and that heater only lasted 5 years, and I figured that would only last about that long anyway. It had a major malfunction at one point. There were parts that were replaced here and there, but there was a part that just kind of died on them, and it caused them just to get a new heater at that point. So using it every day, keep heating your pool to 90 degrees, and this is something that if you have the budget to do, I guess you can do that. It's going to wear it out faster. If you use it 1 or 2 times a season, and maybe 10 times the whole year, you're going to get a pretty good lifespan out of that heater. So I would say an average heater with the average usage of maybe, let's say, 10 to 15 times a year, get a good 9 to 12 years out of that heater without really any problems. The parts wear out pretty quickly in the heaters. Unfortunately, even if you don't use them that often, the parts do age in them, but you're going to get a pretty good lifespan out of the heater, and you can keep fixing parts and rebuilding them for several years. The reason why you would probably want to upgrade in the future is that the newer models are more efficient and they heat up faster, they work better, they're smaller. So I would say if your heater is 15 years old, it's time probably for a new model that is going to heat better and be more efficient in most cases. And then, of course, saltwater generators are a big part of equipment pads now, and I would say that the actual saltwater power center or unit will last for several years. Depending on the brand, you're going to change more cells than you are going to change out the power unit of these systems. They're pretty durable. There's not a lot to them. Most of them are pretty simple. I think Pentair has the most simple power unit. They have most of the electronics on their cells. And then Hayward has a little more complicated power unit, but they're pretty reliable, and the cells are going to wear out a lot faster. So your salt cell maybe is going to last 3 to 5 years. And then the power unit itself, upwards of 15 years in most cases. They're just very durable. They're well made. There's not a lot that goes into them. So the fail point of a saltwater system is generally the salt cell aging out over usage. The cell plates start to be used up. Most cells come with 10,000 hours of usage, some 15,000 hours. But basically, if you're running it at a normal amount of time and your seasons are 5 or 6 months long. Figure you're going to get 4 to 5 years max out of your salt cell, and sometimes you can get 7 or 8, but it's not unusual to have to go through 3 or 4 salt cells before replacing the whole system at some point. I don't think it really matters which brand of salt cell or which system you have. They're going to have the average lifespan. And again, the hours are rated per cell that you purchase. And sometimes the cost of replacing the cell is going to be a shock to you. But that's the convenience of a saltwater system. And if anyone tells you that it's going to save you money on chlorine or on chemicals, it really won't, because you're going to be replacing components on there. Of course, the cell is the major component, and eventually the power unit will have to be replaced. Some things that are on the equipment that you may not think about too often, and these are the valves. And the most popular valves out there are the Jandy valves. The valves themselves are very long lasting. Even if you turn them often, one way or the other, if you have spa and pool mode, they'll last quite a long time. In fact, you'll be surprised that you may not have to replace these things for 15 or 20 years. They're just that good and long lasting. I have some really old Ortega valves on my route, and these are really, really old valve systems. They don't work anymore, but they're still there. They're not leaking or anything. But just to say that, some old equipment, they still actually are functioning in some way. And the way I say they're functioning, they're not leaking at least. And you can kind of turn the old Ortega valves if you really put a lot of effort into it. But you can see that the Jandy valves are a much better system. Now, what does fail a lot are the valve actuators that you put onto the valves when you have an automated system like a Pentair Easy Touch or a Aqualink system. The Jandy valves are taken off, but the components are still left in there. And then you put the valve actuator on top. And the valve actuators are not all made the same. You have Hayward making them, Jandy makes them, Pentair makes them with the Compool version. I believe they purchased that company because it doesn't really seem like a Pentair product, because the Compool ones fail a lot out there. And you would want to replace the Compool valves with a Jandy valve or the Jandy valve actuator. They're much more reliable. And these valve actuators are universal to work with any automated system. Even Intermatic makes a valve actuator. And I think the fail of these is the gears inside. Over time, they're going to wear out, and you'll know when these fail is when the pool is in pool mode, but is still in spa suction and it's draining the spa down. Or you're trying to use your spa and it won't go in to spa return mode and the water is overflowing the spillway. More than likely, the valve actuator has failed at this point, and you have to replace it. Now, if you're having a party that day and you want to put it in spa mode, you can actually take the 4 screws off, remove the valve actuator, put the valve handle back on the valve, and you can actually turn it manually. It's not like once these fail that you can't use your pool. You can actually just remove it. And I don't really worry about water leaking. It's one of those weird things where even with 4 screws missing, there's no water coming out of the valve itself. There's a pretty good sealed O-ring in there. But you can, of course, manually operate it in a pinch if you need to. But these do fail, and it's another part of the equipment that has a particular lifespan based on manufacture and also based on usage. A lot of pools have the rainbow chlorinators, and I've always wondered why the tubing is out of such a cheap material, because invariably the tubing will snap and sometimes it'll drain the pool down considerably. But just note that the rainbow tubing needs to be checked often on the offline chlorinators. It's really a thin plastic and the sun really damages it. You can wrap it with some, protective tape. I think that's a smart idea. But in general, there's a lot of fail points on other components like chlorinators. They're going to wear out fast because, of course, they're just not made as durable as other components, but there are also a lot of wear parts on the chlorinators. Even the lid on the chlorinator would be considered a wear part because there's an O-ring on there. Every time you unloosen it and put a tablet in there, plus the chemicals wear out the O-ring. I would consider that wearing out. Also, the tubing wears out. So there's a lot of parts on these products that wear out. So any other component on your pool, whether it be the offline chlorinator or online chlorinator, always check the parts because they're going to wear out sooner than your other equipment. And I always make sure that I do a thorough check of the equipment whenever I'm at the stop to make sure there's no leaks anywhere. Usually the chlorinators will start leaking at some point before a catastrophic failure, but not all the time. So those parts do wear out quite a bit. And as far as the intermatic timers, now this is another product that used to be made so well that they would last like 30 years. You would have a timer on your route that was like older than yourself. It was crazy. The box is completely rusted. It looks like something from the Titanic that's, that someone installed there. Basically, the intermatic timers aren't made nearly as good as they used to be, so you may not get the 30 or 40-year lifespan out of the timer mechanism. The way that you can check, of course, there's a little sight window there. You can actually see the gears moving. You can actually hear the ticking, and so the ticking noise to me is a telltale sign that it's actually working. And of course, if the dial is not moving or it's not turning on and off regularly, then the mechanism needs to be replaced. You can, of course, replace small components in these timers if you wanted to, like the gearbox, but I think the mechanisms are so inexpensive you would just replace the whole thing. It's pretty easy. Just make sure you mark the wires and make sure you get the exact model number. You can pull it off of the box, and on the back would be the intermatic timer model number and the voltage. The model number indicates the voltage of the timer as well. So if you're uncertain, just take it out of the box. It just clips in, and look at the back of the timer, and that'll give you the model number. And if you replace it with the same exact model number, the wires should go on there perfectly in the same locations, and it's a pretty easy fix at that point. But you're not going to get the lifespan out of the timers you used to, unfortunately, and that's kind of a shame because it's one of those things that, it's a sign of the times that I mentioned that things just don't last as long as they used to, and it's kind of a sad state of all manufacturing, I guess. There's kind of built-in obsolescence, and so you're going to have to replace stuff more often than you used to. But I hope this gives you some idea of what to plan for, as far as equipment replacement, how much time is left on certain things. If you bought a house and there's older equipment, this will give you a good idea of what to look for. And if you're taking over a pool and there's equipment that you think is old or aging out, this will give you a good idea of when to approach the customer to replace it. I think a lot of times leaks are a big indicator there's something wrong. Weird noises. Of course, when a motor is burning out, it gets really squealy and loud, and those are indicators. And any kind of cracks in equipment is an indicator that needs to be replaced sooner than later at that point. If you're looking for other podcasts I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. Just click on the podcast icon on my website. That'll take you to a menu of 1,400 podcasts I've recorded. And if you're interested in the coaching program, you can learn more at poolguycoaching.com. Thanks for listening to this podcast. Have a great rest of your week, and God bless. Real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.